The sound of the gavel striking the hardwood echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. Petition denied, the judge declared, her voice cold and final. Across the aisle, my wife's attorney froze, mouth half open, while my wife's face twisted into something between shock and rage. She had expected this to be her moment. Her glorious triumph. The day she'd walk away with half my life's work in her pocket. Instead, she had nothing. Absolutely nothing. She clutched her folder of evidence like it could reverse the ruling, her knuckles turning white. The smugness she had paraded for weeks was gone, replaced with wide, frantic eyes darting around the room, looking for someone, anyone, to explain what had just happened. I didn't move. Didn't gloat. I simply adjusted my tie, rose from my seat, and slid the thick binder of my financial disclosures into my briefcase. Across the aisle, she finally broke. How did he do this?" she shouted, her voice cracking as the courtroom gasped. Her lawyer leaned close, whispering frantically, but I caught enough to know the truth: they were blindsided. She thought she was the hunter. Instead, she was the prey. As the bailiff called for order, I turned toward her for the first time that morning. She expected anger. Maybe even smugness. But I gave her neither. I gave her a smile. Slow. Calm. The kind of smile that says checkmate. Because 2 weeks earlier, I had already known what she was planning. And I had already moved every last asset out of her reach. The house. In a trust. The accounts. Shifted offshore. The business. Signed over temporarily to a partner I trusted more than her. She had come to court expecting a feast. Instead, she found an empty table. And the look on her face, as she realized her master plan had turned to dust, was worth every ounce of pain she had caused me. My name is Daniel Hayes. I'm 42 years old, an entrepreneur, and, until recently, a husband. I didn't stumble into this courtroom by accident. No, I was led here. Step by step. By whispers. By lies. By the cold smile of a woman I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with. It started small. Late-night phone calls she ended abruptly when I walked into the room. Calendar appointments marked simply lunch, though she never mentioned who with. A shift in tone, shorter, sharper, like I was no longer her partner but her inconvenience. And then came the slip. A printed email left out on the counter. My wife had always been careful, but that morning, she was in a rush. And as I walked past, the subject line burned into me. Divorce strategy, asset division and timing. The email burned in my mind long after I put it down. At first, I thought maybe I had read it wrong. Divorce? Strategy? Those words weren't supposed to belong to my marriage. Not after 12 years together. Not after the countless nights building our business side by side. But there it was in black and white. Divorce strategy, asset division and timing. I remember the way my stomach dropped, like I had just missed the last step on a staircase. My hands trembled as I scrolled. She hadn't just considered divorce, she had planned it. Bullet points, timelines, even a note about ensuring emotional leverage through staged outbursts. She was preparing to perform. Preparing to ambush me. And worst of all, she wasn't doing it alone. Her lawyer had been copied on every single email. They were treating me not like a husband, not like a partner, but like a mark. A gullible fool whose assets were there for the taking. I remember staring at her when she came home that evening, grocery bags in her hands, humming like nothing had changed. She kissed me on the cheek and asked about my day, and I forced myself to smile back. Inside, though, a storm was brewing. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I couldn't, not without proof, not without preparation. If she was plotting a divorce like a military operation, then I had to fight her the same way, strategically, ruthlessly, silently. That night, after she went to bed, I poured myself a glass of whiskey and sat in my office. My mind raced. My wife wasn't just leaving me, she was going to try to destroy me. And if I let her blindside me, she would succeed. So I made a decision. I was going to beat her at her own game. The very next morning, I called an old friend of mine, Jeff, a corporate lawyer I hadn't spoken to in years. He was discreet, tough as nails, and more importantly, loyal to me. When I laid everything out, what I'd found, what I suspected, he didn't laugh or tell me I was being paranoid. He leaned back in his chair, steepled his fingers, and said one sentence I'll never forget. "Daniel, if you're right, you have maybe 2 weeks before she files." 2 weeks. That was all the time I had to dismantle 12 years of shared finances and rebuild them in a fortress she couldn't breach. And I didn't waste a single hour. 2 weeks. That phrase hung over me like a metronome. Tick. 2 weeks. Tick. 2 weeks. Every waking minute was suddenly measured against it. I dressed the way I always did, shirt ironed, tie perfect, shoes shined. I went to meetings. I smiled at the barista who spelled my name wrong. I kissed my wife on the cheek before she left for work. I lived in the act of normalcy because, the lawyer told me, if she smelled fear she'd move faster. Appear calm. Appear oblivious. Let her file thinking she'd caught me off guard. But inside, I was a man rearranging a life. I won't pretend it was glamorous. It was paperwork and coffee, late nights at a corner table with my laptop and a stack of legal notes. It was phone calls to old partners and a dozen meetings with people whose faces I had only seen in business emails. It was watching the sun come up twice while my wife slept beside me, pretending we'd never been further apart. Jeff, my lawyer. And I worked like clockwork. He advised. I complied. Nothing illegal. Nothing deceptive beyond the necessary secrecy of a man protecting what he'd built. That distinction mattered to me. I wanted the moral high ground even as my heart stung. We moved first where the friction would be lowest and the effects highest, the business. 12 years of sweat, long nights, and sweat-streaked suits were wrapped up in that company like a second child. She and I had started it together. She'd taken the marketing and the glossy client dinners, I'd handled logistics, negotiations, the long, invisible hours no one applauded. Its valuation alone could tip a divorce settlement into ruin for me. I had to secure it, but I did it with legal eyes watching. Jeff proposed a temporary measure, an arrangement that would both protect the company and avoid any implication of fraud. He negotiated with our longtime partner, Marcus, a man I trusted and who, crucially, had a stake in the company's future. In the meeting rooms of a downtown law firm, over stale coffee and legal pads, we executed an interim management agreement. Marcus would assume operational control under a formal, recorded contract. I signed papers that established contingencies, fiduciary duties, and, importantly, a clear record of intent and timing, not a shadowy disappearance but a documented transfer meant to stabilize the company in the event of personal disruption. Every clause, every signature, was witnessed. It felt surreal handing over the front-facing roles I'd always played. I was the founder who taught the company to breathe, and suddenly I was stepping back so it could keep beating. The loss was bitter, but it wasn't surrender. It was survival. Next came the house. That place held 1,000 small ghosts, children's laughter that never was, Thanksgiving dinners, and late-night talks over bad TV. The idea of the bank deciding its fate made bile crawl up my throat. So we moved carefully, always with the lawyers in the loop. If this part of the story sounds antiseptic, it's because it was legal forms, notarized signatures, and the kind of sterile, bureaucratic language that hides its own brutality. I transferred titles in a way that the record showed as restructuring, protecting the asset while preserving my interests. It was not hiding, it was rearranging ownership in a way that honored contracts, reflected business realities, and, most importantly, left a documented trail that any court would respect. I slept less during those nights but slept at least knowing I'd done it under the umbrella of counsel and law. There were financial accounts to consider too. We consolidated, we restructured, and we converted where appropriate, all with accountants involved, all with tax implications weighed and discussed. Jeff insisted on transparency with anyone we engaged, nothing secretive that could be construed as concealment. The fear of sliding from protector to perpetrator was very real. I wanted to protect what was mine, not commit a crime. But it wasn't just balance sheets and titles. The emotional cost landed with punches every time I walked into the house and saw the life we'd painted together. I started taking small things, books, an old watch, photographs, out in the dead of night and carried them to a storage unit down the block. Not because I wanted to hide them, but because I couldn't sleep with them under the same roof as her anymore. They were reminders of a life that was about to be litigated, which felt obscene. Those boxes became talismans of an existence I was no longer willing to gamble away. I also had to manage optics. If word leaked that I'd been moving assets, it would be catastrophic. Leaks breed suspicion, which breeds lawsuits. So I kept my face public and my moves private. At brunch with mutual friends I laughed too loud. At a client luncheon I told anecdotes and deflected questions about the business. To everyone else, we were the same couple with the nice house and the successful business. To her, I was the oblivious husband she'd planned to ambush. And to myself, I was something else entirely, meticulous, precise, and exhausted. The nights were the hardest. Sitting at my kitchen table with legal pads, circling clauses, feeling like a chess player forced to think 5 moves ahead. I'd rehearse my answers to questions I didn't want to be asked in depositions. I read into case law until my eyes blurred. I watched our home like a man watching the tide. At times the dread was so thick I imagined it taking physical form, a living thing circling the bed, whispering what I had always been too naive to hear. There were practical hazards too. My wife started wiring emotional traps without even realizing it. She'd ask innocuous questions, "Are you feeling okay?" But in her tone there was a test. A trap. Once, she asked casually if I'd signed anything new. My stomach clenched. I deflected. "Just some company housekeeping," I said. "Nothing to worry about." She smiled, relieved, and I almost hated her for the sweetness of that ignorance. I kept the manila folder with the original email tucked in the top drawer where only I knew. Sometimes I'd take it out and read the signature lines like a map, dates, names, and the cold, corporate phrasing that told me she'd planned this like a campaign. It was both fuel and poison. I couldn't use it recklessly. I couldn't show it and expect sympathy. I had to make the law and the paperwork do the talking. On the 12th day, we finalized the last move. My hand shook as I signed the final page in Jeff's office. There was a small, almost ceremonial weight to pushing the pen across the paper. It felt like burning bridges intentionally and with dignity. And then we waited. In those quiet hours between actions and consequence, I wrestled with my own reflection. What kind of man rearranges his entire life to avoid being hurt? One who won't be eaten by the wolves, or one who refuses to be vulnerable? I never settled the question. The stakes were too high to philosophize. 2 days later, she filed. It was, disturbingly, almost anticlimactic. She served papers like a woman who'd practiced the move in front of a mirror, breathing hard, rehearsing her lines. She looked like she expected a roar, a tantrum, perhaps even tears. Instead, she found me composed, the pen still warm in my hand from the previous week's signing. I received the summons with a measured sigh and a handshake offered across the kitchen island as if we were two professionals discussing an unwelcome, but necessary, transaction. Inside, the lawyer smugly declared she had leverage. Inside, the court would rule, she thought, in the way the email had outlined. But the legal scaffolding Jeff and I had erected over the last fortnight turned the leverage into ash. When the motions were filed, the reaction was immediate. The other side, confident and sharp at first, reeled. Documents were requested. Discovery deadlines were set. Skeletons were asked into the light. When her attorney first called, I could hear the shift. The voice that had been so sure suddenly thrummed with static. "Daniel," he said through the line, "we need to discuss settlement." There it was, the tremor that indicated the armor had cracked. The counterattack hadn't been violent. It had been surgical. It had cost me nights of sleep and a slow erosion of the image of myself as the trusting husband. It had been a civilized war fought with signatures, trustees, and witnesses. I had no victory to gloat about. The moral cost lingered. But when it mattered most, when the judge's gavel fell and the room blurred around my wife's stunned face, I realized the arithmetic had been worth it. Because all the legalese, all the careful arrangements, ultimately bought me something I'd almost lost, the chance to walk away with my dignity intact. It happened on a Wednesday. The morning began unremarkably: coffee, emails, a phone call to a supplier. My wife breezed through the kitchen in a silk blouse, lips glossed, perfume thick in the air. She kissed me on the cheek with a sweetness that felt rehearsed, then walked out the door. An hour later, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find a man in a cheap suit holding a folder. His expression was bland, but his words carried the weight of a guillotine. "Mr. Hayes, you've been served." He pressed the papers into my hand, turned, and left without ceremony. Just like that, the countdown began. The summons was neatly stapled, the legal jargon crisp and merciless. She wanted dissolution of marriage. She wanted the house. She wanted spousal support. She wanted half the business. Half my life. Half of me. I stood in the foyer, reading her demands with an odd detachment. My reflection in the glass door looked strangely calm, as if it were someone else holding the wreckage. I'd been waiting for this moment. Preparing for it. And yet, there was still a sting, a finality that no amount of planning could soften. That night, she came home and watched me like a predator waiting for a flinch. I didn't give her one. "You got the papers," she said casually, pouring herself a glass of wine. "Yes," I replied. "Nothing more." She tilted her head, her eyes sharp. "I think it's for the best, Daniel. You'll see." I almost laughed. The arrogance in her tone, the certainty that she'd already won, was the best confirmation I could have asked for. She had no idea the battlefield she was stepping onto. 2 weeks later, we sat across from each other in the courthouse. She wore a navy dress, pearls at her throat, her posture immaculate. She looked every inch the wronged wife. Her attorney, slick-haired and smug, whispered strategy into her ear. They smiled like lions circling a limping deer. On my side, Jeff sat stone-faced beside me, a fortress of calm. He'd armed me with facts, filings, and a strategy as airtight as a submarine hull. The judge called us to order. The case began. Her lawyer moved first, presenting her as a victim of neglect, as a woman who had sacrificed her best years to a husband who cared only for his empire. He painted me as a cold, distant man who prioritized profit over love. I let him talk. I let him weave his narrative, let my wife dab at her eyes with a tissue, let the courtroom soak in their performance. It was almost impressive, like watching actors in a play they'd rehearsed for weeks. And then it was our turn. Jeff rose, his voice calm but cutting. He presented documents, dated transfers, notarized signatures, agreements filed in full compliance with the law. He laid them out piece by piece, a puzzle that revealed itself with devastating clarity. The house? Protected. The business? Secure. The accounts? Already settled beyond her reach. The courtroom shifted. Her lawyer's confidence cracked, his rhythm faltering. He asked for recesses. He shuffled papers like a drowning man grasping for a rope. And then came the moment I'll replay in my mind for years. Jeff handed the judge the printed email. The one I had found weeks ago. The divorce strategy my wife had drafted. The judge's brow furrowed as she read, the silence in the room growing thick. When she looked up, her gaze was sharp as a blade. "This was your plan?" she asked my wife. My wife stammered, tried to explain, but the words tangled in her throat. The courtroom wasn't sympathetic anymore. The tears didn't work this time. Everyone could see the truth. This wasn't a woman blindsided by cruelty. This was a predator caught in her own snare. The gavel fell like thunder. Petition denied. Her world collapsed in that instant. Mine was already rebuilt. The sound of the gavel still rang in my ears as I walked out of the courtroom. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The silence behind me was louder than any victory chant. I could feel her eyes boring into my back, burning with disbelief, rage, and something else I hadn't seen in her for a long time, fear. The reporters weren't there, no cameras waited on the courthouse steps. But in my chest, it felt like the whole world had just witnessed her empire crumble. Jeff patted my shoulder as we stepped onto the marble steps. "You did well," he said simply. I hadn't said much of anything at all, but maybe that was the point. I didn't need to scream or gloat. The law had spoken for me. I went home that night to an empty house. Her perfume still clung to the curtains, faint but stubborn, like a ghost that refused to leave. I poured a drink and sat in the dark, staring at the framed photographs of vacations and anniversaries that now felt like props in a long con. For the first time in weeks, I let myself breathe. The storm was over. Or so I thought. It started with a text. "Daniel. Can we talk?" I didn't reply. Then came a call. Straight to voicemail. Another. And another. By the third day, she showed up at the house. I opened the door to find her standing on the porch, makeup smeared, hair unkempt, a far cry from the polished woman who had sat across from me in court. She looked human again. Vulnerable. "Daniel, please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "We don't have to do this. We can fix it. I made a mistake." I stood in the doorway, the memory of her divorce strategy email like a knife in my pocket. "A mistake?" I said, my voice low. "You plotted this for months. You tried to gut me alive." Tears spilled down her cheeks. I was scared. "I thought you didn't love me anymore, I thought you'd leave me first." I panicked. "Please, I'm begging you. We can start over." Her hands reached for mine, trembling. For a fleeting moment, I saw the woman I had married, the one who used to laugh with me over burnt dinners, who danced barefoot in the kitchen. But the vision shattered as quickly as it appeared. This wasn't about love. This was about loss. She hadn't come back because she loved me. She had come back because her plan had failed, and she couldn't stomach the reality of walking away empty-handed. "I can't," I said finally. She froze, her fingers curling into fists at her sides. "Daniel. I gave you my trust. My loyalty. My life. And you turned it into a blueprint for betrayal. You don't get to come back from that." Her face twisted, the desperation giving way to fury. "You think you've won? You think this is over? You'll regret this. You'll regret everything." Maybe she was right. Maybe one day I would regret it. But standing there, with the ashes of our marriage between us, I felt nothing but clarity. I closed the door. Her muffled sobs lingered on the other side for a while. Then, finally, silence. That night, I sat at the kitchen table again, but this time without papers or strategies. Just me, a glass of whiskey, and the knowledge that I had survived. She had tried to break me. Instead, she broke herself. And as I looked out the window into the quiet street, I realized something. Revenge hadn't been about taking anything from her. It had been about protecting myself. About refusing to be devoured. She wanted half my life. Instead, she lost her place in it entirely. Checkmate. The weeks after the courtroom felt eerily quiet. No late-night arguments. No slammed doors. No cold silences at the dinner table. The house was still, almost too still, like the air after a hurricane has passed. I half expected another storm to come, some new lawsuit or a desperate stunt. But instead, there was nothing. At least, nothing from me. From her side. It was chaos. Word spreads fast in our circles. Business associates, friends, even extended family, everyone heard whispers of the courtroom debacle. Not the sanitized version she might have told, but the ugly truth, that she had plotted a calculated divorce, and it had blown up in her face. The sympathy she expected wasn't there. Instead, people pulled back. Invitations stopped coming. Her friends grew quiet, embarrassed to be caught in the blast radius of her failed scheme. Even her family, who had always adored her, started asking questions she didn't want to answer. I heard through the grapevine that her father had said one sentence at a family dinner that cut her deeper than anything I could have delivered. "You didn't lose to Daniel. You lost to yourself." Without my income, without access to the assets she thought she'd win, her lifestyle started to unravel. The designer handbags, the salon visits, the endless brunches, gone. She took an apartment across town. Modest, clean, but far from the 5-bedroom house she once called home. Friends who used to fawn over her Instagram stories suddenly weren't around to help her carry groceries up the stairs. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Watching from a distance was enough. One evening, I drove past the coffee shop we used to visit together. Through the window, I saw her sitting alone, scrolling through her phone, her face tight and weary. She looked like someone desperately searching for a lifeline that wasn't there. I didn't stop. Meanwhile, my life didn't collapse. It hurt. God, did it hurt. Losing the illusion of love is like losing oxygen. For weeks, I woke up expecting to hear her voice, to smell her perfume, only to remember it was gone. But slowly, the silence turned from suffocating to freeing. I threw myself into work. Marcus and I reshaped the business with new strategies, new contracts, and a focus that wasn't diluted by suspicion. Revenue grew. Clients multiplied. For the first time in years, I felt sharp again, not dragged down by someone else's weight. At home, I stripped the walls bare of photos. I replaced them with paintings I'd always wanted but never bought. I cooked for myself. I invited friends over again. Laughter filled the rooms where tension used to choke. And in those small victories, I realized the truth. I hadn't just defended myself from her betrayal. I had reclaimed myself. Months later, Jeff called me with news. "She's trying to reopen negotiations," he said, his tone almost amused. I laughed. "On what grounds?" "She claims she misunderstood the financial landscape at the time of filing." Translation: she thought she could claw something back. The judge dismissed her motion within minutes. That was the final nail in the coffin. She had burned every bridge, played every card, and lost them all. The law had spoken. The doors were closed. 1 year later, I saw her again. Not in a courtroom. Not on my doorstep. I was driving through downtown when I spotted her walking across the street. She wore simple clothes, carried a tote bag, and looked ordinary. No pearls. No designer heels. Just a woman navigating a life she hadn't planned for. For a moment, our eyes met. She froze, her lips parting like she wanted to say something. Maybe an apology. Maybe one last plea. But the light changed. Traffic moved. And just like that, she was gone, swallowed by the crowd. I didn't chase her. I didn't need to. Because in that moment, I understood, revenge wasn't the gavel, or the denial of her petition, or even her downfall. Revenge was walking away whole when she had gambled everything that I wouldn't. And I had. People always think revenge is loud. They picture smashed cars, screaming matches, a dramatic scene where one person storms out and the other collapses in tears. They imagine it ends in fire, in chaos, in some movie-style explosion. But standing here, a year after the storm, I know the truth. Revenge can be silent. Revenge can be paperwork. Revenge can be the weight of consequences crushing someone long after you've stopped watching. I won't lie, she took things from me. She took the trust one once had, the easy belief that love was unconditional. She took years I'll never get back, mornings where I made her coffee with a smile, nights where I ignored my instincts because I wanted to believe in us. She even took the version of myself that thought I wasn't capable of surviving without her. Those things are gone. And yes, it hurts. But here's the thing, sometimes loss clears the ground for growth. Because in her attempt to strip me bare, I discovered what couldn't be taken. My discipline. My foresight. My ability to adapt when betrayal knocked me off balance. I found strength in protecting what was mine. I found resilience in walking away without looking back. And strangely enough, I found peace. Her plan wasn't just about money. It was about control. She thought she could dictate the end of our story, script my downfall, and walk away as the victor. But that's the irony of betrayal, it often leaves the betrayer with nothing but ashes. She underestimated me. She underestimated the quiet power of preparation. She underestimated the fact that once someone has seen your true face, they'll never hand you another mask to hide behind. In the end, she didn't just lose the assets. She lost the illusion of power. She lost me. And she lost the world she thought she could own. Do I still think of her? Sometimes. Late at night, when the house is quiet and the memories slip in. But instead of rage, I feel clarity. She was a storm. And I was the ground she tried to tear apart. The storm passed. The ground remains. If you've ever felt the cold hand of betrayal, if you've ever watched someone you trusted twist your love into a weapon, hear this. You don't always need to burn yourself to burn them back. Sometimes the smartest, most devastating revenge is to endure, to prepare, and to let them drown in the very trap they set for you. Walk away stronger. Walk away whole. Walk away knowing they expected you to break. And you didn't. Because that, in the end, is the sweetest revenge of all. If you enjoyed this story, Please subscribe to this channel and drop a comment where you are watching from.